Good evening. Thank you guys for coming out and being with us on a cold night. I was scared the time might keep you away. I was scared the temperature might keep you away. Honestly, I got scared that because we recorded and uploaded the last one, that might keep you away. But you've surprised me and you've honored me and my guest here tonight by showing up and being here. Steve is a great guy that I've known for a number of years. Steve was my presenter. When you go before the Board of Ordained Ministry,
I was wondering if you're going to bring that up.
They take an elder and they take somebody on the board and they read everything you write. So he's read every word of my theology and my practice and everything I turned in for the board. And then he presents me to the board. And so anyway, he guided me through that process. And so I've been friends with him since, and we work together with licensing. We license local pastors every year. So
that's right.
He's a good guy, and he has got a deep passion for the United Methodist Church and continuing in that in that denomination. So he's going to share with us tonight, and I want to thank him for being here.
You're sure.
And we're going to pray. So let's pray. Holy and gracious God, we give you thanks for this evening and for this opportunity we have to gather together as your people. We ask that your spirit would be felt among us, that you would be with our presenter tonight, Steve, and that you would be with us as we hear and listen to what he has to say, and that you would ultimately continue to lead and guide our congregation through this time of discernment and a time of praying and listening to your direction. We pray in Christ's holy name. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you, Josh. Yes, thank you for the chance to be here. My name is Steve. Am I not on? I'm on. Oh, we'll wait till you can hear me. So we're good. It's a joy to be here. I have never been in this sanctuary. This is absolutely stunning. I love the architecture, the gathering area out there. It's just beautiful. I've never been here, and I appreciate the invitation. But we are United Methodist, and we're connected, so I feel very much at home. We'll talk about that tonight. Josh is correct. I was his presenter on the Board of Ordained Ministry. What he didn't tell you, it is true, I read a file that big of everything about Josh, including his psychological examination profile. So I brought a copy to go over with y'all. No, you're welcome. That's right. But it's a good thing, and we have been licensing local pastors. You know, that's part of what makes United Methodist so unique in America is that we have elders and licensed local pastors, and that started from the very beginning. You might have heard of the American Revolution that interrupted England's ministry in America quite a bit, and all the early Methodists, their pastors started being shipped back to England because they didn't want to be here during the Revolution. And so John Wesley finally agreed to start a new denomination so they could have licensed local pastors. And that really was the driving, the practical reason that we are not still Anglican or Episcopal or some version of that. And the rest is history. And still today, out on the frontier, the highways and the byways, we're able to get the message and to send people. And that's what licensed local pastors are. It's just a joy to be here and to share with you. I actually came with a gift for Josh for inviting me. I promise I'm not doing this so you'll buy it on Amazon, but I have a new book that I have just recently done that actually has to do with my beliefs and my passion. It's called Something Happens Here, and its subtitle is Reclaiming the Distinctiveness of Wesley's Communion Spirituality for Our Times of Divisiveness. And I am convinced that the reason we're even having to have these conversations is because our country is divided, not our church. Our country is divided, and the culture wars are spilling over into the church. And so I just give that to Josh. You do know how to read, right? I haven't given you one already. Okay, all right. So, okay, that's true. Well, you passed, so you must be all right. But thank you. I am very passionate, and again, I feel very much at home because we are a connectional church, and that's part of what I don't want to lose. I understand you had my friend John Hill here, was it last week? A couple of weeks ago. And he is a colleague. He has different views than I do, but I'm just as passionate as he is. So I appreciate you looking at different options, and I respect your decisions as a congregation and want to support that. I have nothing against those who are planning to leave the denomination. They're leaving because of their convictions. I'm staying because of mine. So I appreciate you just letting me speak to you tonight so you can open your hearts and you're doing a discernment process, right? You're in the discernment process, so you want to openly look at all the options. And I'm here to share with you about the option of staying in the United Methodist Church. I became a Christian when I was 10 years old. My daddy was the pastor at Athens First Methodist and took us on a retreat to a place up near where I live called Camp Lee. I just had a formative experience. And I remember asking my dad, can I say something at the closing worship service? And like a good pastor, he didn't say, what is it you're going to say? He said, sure. And so I got up at the end of that, and I remember like it was yesterday. I said, I've grown up in the church. I've learned the stories of Jesus. I've gone to vacation Bible school. I've gone to Sunday school. I think I know a lot of the stories of Jesus. But this weekend, I realized Jesus is real, and he's not just a storybook character. And I want everybody to know that I'm going to serve him with my whole life. Now, if I had known I was going to be standing here as a preacher, I might have run the other way and not said anything. But those connections. Camp Lee is a Methodist camp owned by another United Methodist Church. Those connections are part of what's warm and what is so sad in times of acrimonious debate and some separations. I have given you a handout. That's just going to guide us a little bit tonight, and I'll jump right in there and share with you some of my passion and some of my heart, and I appreciate very much Josh inviting me. I might not have enough for everybody. Y'all can certainly make some more copies. That would be great. My purpose, again, is to respect your decision, but to allow for you're allowing me to speak in favor of staying in the United Methodist Church. Most of the United Methodist Church is going to stay intact. It's estimated that about 15% of the United Methodist Church in North America is going to disaffiliate. That's an estimate. Nobody knows for sure. It'd probably be a little higher than 15% here in the Bible Belt. But that's kind of what we're looking at. And most churches are staying together. I'm not going to spend you a lot of time on background, but just to give you a little bit of snippet of background to catch us up tonight. There was a called general conference in 2019, being aware that we have a little bit of an impasse in our church over a few issues. And a commission on the way forward, which is supported by the bishops, brought forward what is called the One Church Plan. Now, this plan did not pass, but this plan, just to get you to where we are, this plan was to move forward together with all kinds of traditional, centrist, and even a few in Alabama, even a few progressive churches, for us all to move together as one church with a concept we basically call contextualization. I like to think of it as states' rights, okay? And a good parallel is our country recently made some decisions about abortion, but we did not outlaw abortion. What we did was pass that decision to the states. That's right. That's what our country did. And so this contextualization would have passed certain agreed upon decisions down to annual conferences and maybe even to local churches. That plan did not pass, okay, but that was the plan to try to move forward mostly together. And instead, a traditional plan was passed, which maintained a lot of the historic language that's been developing there over the past 30 or 40 years. Maintained that language. However, aware that most of the delegates in America had voted for the One Church Plan. The WCA, the Wesleyan Covenant Association, which John Hill represents, made sure that in the legislation in 2019 there was a way to disaffiliate, and that was put in there. That was actually put in there by the more conservative wing of the church to make sure there was an out either by those they opposed or themselves. And just to catch you up, then in May we were supposed to have our third rescheduled general conference, and it didn't happen because it's been rescheduled several times because of the difficulty of traveling visas from 45 countries. And you've heard of this COVID thing, right? Okay, that's something that's connected us all. I just got over COVID 2 months ago, so I know it well. When it was postponed this last time, the WCA announced the founding of the Global Methodist Church. It was suddenly and unilaterally announced that they're going to begin, even though General Conference has not happened to agree upon terms of a separation. So that's why we're here. The breakaway denomination has begun. So here we are, and churches are considering discernment under what was legislated in 2019. Again, the discipline has not changed, not fundamentally. It actually changes every 4 years in some way. It's an evolving document, but as far as the items in question, it has not fundamentally changed. If it does change at some point in the future, and it won't be a 2024, but in some point in the future, it'll be some sort of contextualization or states' rights kind of understanding. But there is never going to be any plan. There is never going to be any plan that will force churches and pastors to do, or even annual conferences, to be any less traditional than they wish to be. There is never going to be any plan to force anything upon anyone. And this is very important for you to understand tonight. This particular exit plan, paragraph 2553, and I'm sure you've heard about that, is only available to the end of 2023 next year. And that was put in there thinking we would have General Conference 3 years ago. Okay, so that's where the deadline has come from. So the next thing I'd like to do is just give you a little full disclosure about me. Again, I serve Jacksonville First United Methodist Church. Unlike Josh, I've been a pastor for 33 years. Yes, I'm an old guy. Here's my declaration. I consider myself I consider myself a traditional Orthodox Wesleyan pastor. Okay? I'm as traditional as you get. I'm a traditional Orthodox Wesleyan pastor. People who are leaving our denomination cannot claim those terms exclusively. And you'll hear people say the traditional pastors are leaving. That's not true, because I am one. For me, there's nothing traditional, Orthodox, or Wesleyan about leaving our denomination unilaterally over some things that are not in the Gospels. Jesus never talks about them. They are not in any of the ancient creeds or councils of the church, never addressed. It is not addressed in any of John Wesley's writings or sermons of any kind, and it is not in any of our articles of religion or core doctrines of our church. Okay, those are the things that define traditional Orthodox and Wesleyan to me. And there's nothing traditional about leaving over things that are not even there. This is over culture wars, plain and simple. Okay, so that's one reason I'm choosing to stay in the UMC and work out whatever we need to work out. The other thing I'd like to share with you in terms of full disclosure is I am one of the central founders of Stay UMC, which I'm sure you've seen online. I had no idea what that would become, but in 2000, after an event down at one of our churches in Birmingham, when there was a rally to support the possibility of leaving the denomination, I wrote a letter that went viral. It surprised me more than it did anybody. The week before, I had 300 hits on my blog, and that week I had 39,000. Okay, so, and then it just kept going from there. But that letter was about why I wished to stay in the United Methodist Church. That actually came after I'd been meeting with some centrists, some moderates in our conference. We called them centrist support groups. We met for several months after 2019, just trying to figure out what we're supposed to do, how to move forward. I was not satisfied with any of the extremes. And so that's where Stay UMC came from. So I didn't write all the material on the website, but I wrote some of it, and it was kind of a team effort, and that's what happened with that. We now have 600 signatories, 173 of them are clergy, messaging that we want to stay in the United Methodist Church and move forward together. We have nothing against those who want to leave. John Hill is my brother in Christ. We have nothing against those who want to leave. They're following convictions, and I'm following my convictions. But I believe you, as a church, should have balanced and accurate information so that you're making a good decision. And that's important. That's why I'm here tonight. Most traditional Methodists will be choosing to stay in the United Methodist Church. And I've already mentioned a little bit about the percentages. So that's the first thing I wanted to do, a little bit of introduction. So thank you for that. The second thing I'd like to do tonight is to share with you my heart about what I call essential Methodist spirituality. Before I do that, I want to talk about some helpful language. That's the next thing I want to do, some helpful language. This actually came from the Commission on a Way Forward, Getting Ready for 2019. One of the best things they did was to help us understand there's basically four kinds of Methodists. And you may have heard this before. There are traditional incompatibilists, traditional compatibilists, progressive compatibilists, and progressive incompatibilists, okay? A traditional incompatibilist is someone, on whatever the social issue you're talking about, is someone who has traditional views, but they don't feel that their faith is compatible with others who have differing views. They don't want to be a part of a denomination or a local church where people have differing views on those issues, okay? They find their faith incompatible with that. A traditional compatibilist has those same traditional views, but may not have the need to be a part of a church or denomination where everybody thinks the same on those views. It's okay to go to church with people who are more progressive than you, or be a part of a denomination where there's variety across the country. And again, progressive compatibilists, same way. They might have progressive views, but they're great with worshiping with more traditional United Methodists. And then you have progressive incompatibilists. That's the only way. The progressive view is the only way we'll accept it, and we don't find it compatible with others. And there are those. May not be as many as in Alabama as other places, but probably the most famous example is one of our largest progressive churches in the United States, Glide Memorial United Methodist Church in San Francisco, left our denomination 2 or 3 years ago because they're progressive incompatibilists. They don't want to be a part of a diverse denomination on those matters, okay? So that's the spread. And I tell you that to say two things. One is to self-disclose. I consider myself a traditional compatibilist when it comes to things like wedding ceremonies in your church. I'm pretty traditional about that. But everybody doesn't have to agree with me. I realize that we live in a country where 70% of the country believes in gay marriage. And I'm okay with having diversity of opinion. But I consider myself a progressive compatibilist when it comes to inclusion in the local church. If somebody walks through that door, Jesus told me I'm supposed to love them. Jesus didn't say but, if, unless. I mean, there was no rest of the sentence. And by loving them, I mean including them in the life of that church. And so I will fight to the death because Jesus told me to do that. He said I would be known by my love for one another. So I believe that. That's my self-disclosure. I also give you that language because it's important for you to understand that it's not traditional Methodists that are leaving the United Methodist Church. It's traditional incompatibilist Methodists that are leaving the United Methodist Church. And if that's who you are, if you don't want to be a part of a denomination or a local church where people think differently about these things, then you might need to leave to form a more like-minded denomination. for me, I love that. I can't even agree with my wife over everything. I do not expect to agree on everything in church. Do you agree with everything in your families? I don't see a show of hands. I don't see any hands. Okay. For me, the very definition of church is we don't have to agree on everything. You don't check each other in the door and decide, you can't come to this church unless you vote a certain way. You don't do that, do you? That's Baptist. No, I'm just kidding. It's not. We are different, and that's helpful language to understand. It's traditional incompatibilists that are leaving. I'll stay with the 85% of the church that wants to move forward together. There are countless traditional and centrist United Methodists that are staying in and moving forward together. The next little segment I want to share with you is also just a little bit from my heart about essential United Methodist spirituality. Now, I have given y'all a handout, and I want to just highlight something from it. There's several balancing resources there for you that I think are real important. The GMC and the WCA have put out some good, reasonable resources, but there's also some guy's blog isn't always the best resource for you to read, and there's some stuff out there that's not true. Okay, so these are balancing resources to help you. Some of the most important ones, I'm going to refer to one for spirituality in a moment, but some of the most important ones are on the top. The conference just the last 2 or 3 weeks came out with some frequently asked questions. It's the absolutely best document you can read to really understand what's going on in our annual conference, and it's the first link on the top of that. And if you don't want to type all those numbers and letters in your computer, you can go to the Stay UMC website and find this same resource list, and you just click the link, okay? The other things, the Adam Hamilton response to the Rob Renfro videos is a really good resource for you to watch to see another point of view on those, in my opinion, misleading videos. There's also some news there recently. The African bishops have declared that they don't want to be a part of the WCA or the GMC. That was a surprise to everybody, even me. The reason they entitled it the Global Methodist Church is because they assumed they were going to be aligning with the bishops of Africa. And you'll see their reasoning in there. They are against the WCA and being a part of the GMC, and there's the Wesleyan Covenant Association, which John Hill is a member of, yes. The WCA, no, the WCA is a political action group that has been working to create the Global Methodist Church. So the WCA is not going to be a denomination. That's the group that has promoted leaving. And the GMC is the name of the new denomination that they're planning to start. That's GMC, okay? So there's a lot of great resources there, but the one I want to call your attention to is down on the list, about 2/3 down the page. There's Tom Berlin is there. I've noted best video to watch, and it was at a Celebrate the UMC event here in Montgomery, Alabama, that I was a part of. And in that, he describes Methodist spirituality in a way that makes perfect sense to me, because I'm pretty simple-minded, and I know you might be too sometimes, okay? He got up there, and he had 2 big, long 2x4s and 2 sawhorses on the stage. And he said, one of these 2x4s, let me show it to you, and he held it out like this, and he scanned the congregation. And it was straight as an arrow. It was a beautiful, just fresh off the shelf at Lowe's or Home Depot or something like that. It was straight as an arrow. It was a great 2x4. And then he picked up the other one, and he did the same thing. He stretched it out like this, and it was warped. You couldn't tell when he first had it, but you could tell when he held it like this. And he kind of made a joke. He said, one of these represents Jesus, and one of these represents us. Which one do you think it is? Like, we didn't know that the straight one represented Jesus and the warped one represented us. And he said, this is how Methodists, Wesleyans, believe the spiritual life is all about. We're created in the image of God, but we're warped by original sin. You're not created ugly. You're not a disgusting being. You're created beautiful, but by original sin, we are warped by our very nature. And Christ can restore us to our original beauty. So what he did is he took the board, one of the boards, and he put it on the sawhorses, and he took the warped board and put it on top. And of course, it bowed up like this, And he said, Methodists believe that spiritual practices, or what Wesley called means of grace, can bind us to Jesus. And he took some clamps and he started clamping the boards together. And he said these spiritual practices are prayer and Bible study and worship and the sacraments and Christian conferencing. That was Wesley's word for what we might call accountability groups now. And fasting and sacrifice. And as he clamped the two boards together, the warped board trued itself up to the straight board. And he said, this is what we believe. You bind yourself to Christ. And if you bind yourself to Christ through spiritual practices, Christ will straighten you out. This is not a Pharisee religion. This is about drawing to Jesus. And I believe that. Christianity, especially Methodist Christianity, is not a Pharisee religion. It's not just about rules and regulations. It's about drawing close to Jesus. Do you remember the story that Jesus told about the Pharisee and the tax collector who went into the temple to pray? And if you remember, the tax collector prayed a good prayer. He prayed, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. The Pharisee's prayer went something like this: thank you so much, God, that I'm not like that tax collector over there. You remember this story? Now, in their time, what we don't realize, in their time, in their culture, in their politics, the tax collector was the sinner of sinners. All right? That was the person everybody hated. So when Jesus was doing this, he was reminding us that all of us come to God humbly. And we let God sort stuff out. I want to be a part of a church that draws people to Jesus and trusts Jesus to work things out with them and tells them what they need to be doing and how to live and how to love. That's what Methodist spirituality is. John Wesley didn't talk about rules. He talked about love and drawing people to love and holiness of heart that comes from loving God and loving your neighbor and from these spiritual practices. These methods, he called them. That's where we get the term Methodist. So it's a heart religion. And the reason it spread like wildfire in early America is precisely because it was a heart religion. They didn't have the attitude that you had to be better than everybody else. You had to be proper Englishmen and you had to be educated. And they appealed to the riffraff on the frontier in America because you didn't have to be proper to be a Christian. And that's why it spread like wildfire. Bring people to Christ, hold them accountable to Christ, and trust Christ to help them work out their ethics. You don't have to agree on things. You don't have to agree on the politics of your time. If we have revival, and we need revival desperately, it's going to come from bringing people back to Christ. And that's what my book's all about, actually, bringing people back to the communion table. And I believe that. That's essential Methodist spirituality. So the next segment I want to share, and I assume we're going to have a little Q&A time at the end for you to share. The next segment I want to share is what I call Methodist myth busting. All right? I'm going to do some Methodist myth busting with you because, like I said, there are good reasons to leave a denomination and there are bad reasons to leave a denomination. If you leave the denomination, I want to make sure you do it for correct reasons and not because of myths and things that are not true. Your church deserves to know the truth and to be able to sort things out in Christian love. There's a few myths I want to address because there's a lot of misinformation out there. And myth number one is this. I printed this in your stuff. Myth number one is this. The beliefs of the UMC are going to dramatically change. Dramatically change. I have heard every single version of this. This is the idea that the post-separation United Methodist Church is going to abandon the Bible and they're going to abandon our beliefs and our creeds, and we're not going to believe in the resurrection, and we're not going to believe in the virgin birth, and we're going to embrace pluralism, and we're going to abandon the lordship of Christ. You name it, I've heard the myth. I want to tell you that's a straw man argument. You know what a straw man argument is? It's when you're not arguing about the issue at hand, you make it about something else. Would you care to guess where the term straw man argument comes from? Don't say John Wesley. That's not accurate. That would be a good guess in this setting. Martin Luther, the leader of the Protestant Reformation, who hammered 95 theses on the Wittenberg door because he believed that you're saved by grace through faith, not by your works. He didn't believe in selling forgiveness or selling indulgences that the Roman church the Catholic Church was doing at the time. He believed everybody ought to be able to read their own Bible. He believed in the priesthood of all believers. We owe a lot to Martin Luther, right? So Martin Luther, when he did that, the Catholic Church made up all sorts of stuff about what he was doing and saying. And they wrote books about how he was taking a position on this or that political issue or this or that church issue within. And he wrote in one of his articles, "They set up a man of straw whom they may attack." And there's the origin of the straw man argument. It's religious in nature. Our core doctrines and articles of religion will not change. In fact, they're in a section of the discipline that can not easily be changed. You can't just vote at General Conference to do that. The articles of religion and the core doctrines in the church, to change anything is constitutional. It would require a 2/3 vote at General Conference plus an aggregate 3/4 vote of all delegates, lay and clergy, at every annual conference around the entire world to change one of those things. They are not going to change. I don't know a single person in the United Methodist Church who wants to abandon our core beliefs. Wesley said, in essentials unity, in non-essentials liberty, and all things charity. Don't believe anything you hear about the Methodist Church is going to abandon our core beliefs in the Lordship of Christ. It's just not true. It's a straw man argument. Second myth I want to bust with you is that extreme examples represent the whole. I bet you've heard some extreme example of a crazy person out somewhere that did something or said something. There's 12.5 million United Methodists. If you shake a tree, a nut might fall out. I mean, it's really, that's the nature of human nature. There's going to be extremes. One method of rhetoric is to find an extreme example and magnify it, maybe share some half-truths about it, wrap it into a narrative, the infidelity of the whole thing. But I promise you, there are nuts out there, and there are going to be nuts in the new denominations as well. I was watching a YouTube video of a Baptist preacher. Y'all got Southern Baptists around here, don't you? Of course, I know I'm in Alabama. That's a silly question. I was watching this Baptist preacher online, and he was yelling. I know that's a surprise to you that he was yelling, but he was yelling. And he was yelling at his Democrats. He said, all you Democrats, you're ungodly. You're all going to hell. I want you to get out. He kept yelling, get out. Now, do you think because I saw a Baptist preacher on YouTube say that I think all Baptist preachers are going to say that? No, he's a nut. I promise you, if you go into a new denomination, they're going to have nuts in it too, and extremists. In any human organization, especially one as large as the United Methodist Church, you're going to have extreme things. And sometimes in other words, if you choose to leave, just remember you're not leaving the extremists for a church that has only perfect people in it. You're going to be leaving the main body of the United Methodist Church for another denomination that also has extremists in it, okay? Because that's human nature, all right? You just need to remember that. Sometimes it's not even true. I decided to do my little myth busting. I heard somebody that was saying, you really should never get into an argument online, but I did. I heard somebody saying that there were bishops that were teaching that that Christ was not divine. They were teaching against the divinity of Christ. And I said, that's no way that's true. I don't believe that. He said, oh, yeah, it is true. I have proof. I said, well, what's the proof? And he said, well, she said that Jesus was a bigot and he was human and we treat him like an idol. And I said, all right, first of all, you didn't give me proof. You told me what she said. Secondly, I would say Jesus was human, and I would say we shouldn't treat him like an idol. So can you actually show me what she wrote? Well, they showed me the devotional she wrote. It was one of the most beautiful devotionals I ever read. There was not anything wrong with it. Let me tell you what the devotional, how it had been interpreted that way to this guy. It was a devotional on the Canaanite woman who came to Jesus, and he was standing around with some of his disciples, and she asked for healing, and he said, it's not right that we give food from the master's table to the dogs. You remember this story? You remember what she said? She said, but even the dogs get to eat crumbs from under the master's table. And Jesus was impressed with her faith. Do you remember this? And so he granted her the healing. So this bishop was saying, when Jesus first answered, he was standing around with Jewish patriarchal society. It was kind of normal to imply that women were dogs. I mean, we don't like that, but it was. So when he first spoke, he was just speaking out of the normal bigotry of his culture. He wasn't really saying anything wrong. There's where bigot came from. But then when he saw her faith, he stepped up. He grew. He changed. He thought about it and said something better, because we believe Jesus is both fully divine and he's fully human. And if he's fully human, he's going to learn and he's going to grow. That's what she said. There's absolutely nothing heretical about that. That's actually a very good explanation of why he called the woman a dog. Okay? And I debated with this guy, because the biggest heresy in the 2nd century was over whether Jesus was fully human or not. And I said, so if you believe Jesus wasn't really fully human and wasn't able to change or grow, you're the one that's teaching a heresy. Okay? All I'm saying is check into the facts. If you hear something, it might be a half-truth. Just check into the facts. I had heard this thing about, and you may have heard it at the Duke Divinity School Chapel, that they prayed to the queer God. Have you heard that one? Okay, well, some of you are nodding your heads. You heard that? I checked into that one because that didn't make sense to me. Well, it did happen, but it was a group of students who asked if they could use the chapel for a non-official service. None of the faculty were there. None of them knew what was going to happen. And most of the students were not United Methodist. Okay? So just check your facts when you hear these extreme examples. They might be taken out of context. There are a lot of straw man arguments and a lot of extreme examples out there. If you want to know what it'd be like to stay in the UMC, ask somebody that wants to stay in the UMC. Don't ask somebody who's trying to convince you to leave the UMC, okay? That's important. So that's myth number 2, that extreme examples represent the whole thing. Myth number 3 is that we're all going to take a hard left on social issues. I've heard some version of this. Oh, as soon as this, and it's not really a split, it's a separation, it's a withdrawal. It's a secession, if you want to call it that, pulling out. But we're not going to all take a hard left on social issues. We will continue to be diverse on social issues. One thing you can expect is diversity of thought in the United Methodist Church. We have never been like-minded and about everything, and that's what I like about the United Methodist Church. That's what I like. Part of the blessing as well as the opportunity and the problem is we are the most evenly widespread denomination in the United States. Have you ever thought about this? There's 2 denominations in the U.S. that are larger than the United Methodist Church. Somebody name one of them. Southern Baptist. It has the word Southern in it. What does that tell you? It's not evenly widespread. It's the largest. Is that the largest denomination around here? It is in Jacksonville. Would that be Southern Baptist? No? Okay. In lots of pockets of Alabama, Southern Baptist is the largest denomination. how many Southern Baptists do you think there are in Minnesota? Or New York? There's a few, but it's Southern. What's the other larger denomination? It's even larger than that. Catholics. How many Catholics are there in Roanoke, Alabama, compared to Methodists? Is it a majority? No, because you live in Alabama. My wife's from New Orleans. Guess what? Lots of Catholics. Methodism is a subset of the non-Catholics, okay? That's the largest denomination in America. It's 5 times as large as the United Methodist Church, but it's not evenly widespread, is it? Okay. The United Methodist Church, there's a United Methodist Church in almost every zip code in the United States. We're evenly widespread. So nationally, we're not going to agree on all the social issues. I actually think that's a strength. And it's hard sometimes when you disagree, but it's a strength. And I like that about us. One of my favorite photographs I've ever seen is a picture of George Bush and Hillary Clinton hugging each other at Bush's father, George Bush Sr.'s funeral. And they're laughing and they're hugging each other. Now, are they in the same political party? No. Did you know they're both United Methodists? Both Hillary Clinton and George Bush are United Methodists. And I love that about our church. You couldn't get farther apart politically than Hillary Clinton and George Bush, but they're both United Methodists. And we all love each other. We don't have to agree. We will not take a hard left on everything. We'll continue to be diverse, and there's lots of traditional Methodists moving forward. Myth number 4. I love this one because it's backwards thinking. Myth number 4, we don't know what the UMC is going to look like in 10 years. You better get out because you don't know what it's going to look like in 10 years. Well, there's partial truth to that because you don't know what anything will look like in 10 years. Could you have imagined a pandemic 10 years ago? I mean, you don't know what's going to happen. So actually, that's true. But this idea that there's some huge uncertainty is a myth. Let me put it to you this way. We have more track record. We have a lot of track record as a denomination. We have more track record. We have way more of a track record than a denomination that doesn't exist yet. Wouldn't you agree with that? We have way more track record than a collection of independent churches that's just figuring out what they're going to do, or joining a denomination which is one of the proposals that I'm sure will be put before you, joining a denomination that before 3 years ago only had 2 churches in Alabama in it. All right. We have a track record. You have no clue what that will look like. That's an uncertainty. I've read the GMC book of the transitional book of doctrines and disciplines, and I've read it 4 times. You know why I've read it 4 times? Because they changed it 4 times. And even the last version says that it's a temporary version until they actually have a convening conference. So we don't know exactly what it's going to say. That's where your uncertainties are. They were even counting, I mentioned this already, they're counting on Africa, and that's why they were calling it Global Methodist. And now the African church is saying they came out against the WCA and against being a part of the GMC. The uncertainties are endless. But I'm telling you, I do know this about the United Methodist Church. We've been through tough times before, and we'll go through tough times again. We have disagreed over slavery, over evolution. You might not think so, but during Reconstruction, pastors were put on trial for teaching evolution in their churches. Women's suffrage, voting, temperance, drinking, segregation, female clergy. We have gone through struggles over all sorts of things, and never once did we go off the deep end afterwards, and we're not going to go off the deep end this time. That's a track record. So that's myth number 4. Myth number 5, and I stress the word only, myth number 5 is the only reason the breakaway group is leaving is because those people are not following the discipline. All right? You're going to hear this one as if there are thousands of people defying the discipline. Now, there are a few cases. That is true. Not as many as you might think. And The abeyance, the not having clergy trials over the last 3 years, that doesn't count because all the parties who created the protocol got together and decided not to do any clergy trials until we work this out. So the last 3 years doesn't count. That was an agreement by the conservatives not to have trials. Okay? There have been lots of trials. Those who have defied the discipline do it because they believe it's their faith, their obedience to Christ. Now, I don't like everything that's happened, and it's a handful of cases. I've always followed the discipline. I made a covenant. I took a vow. I took a vow to my wife. I took a vow to follow the discipline. But I've also discovered that whether or not I agree with the protest methods, it's not because they don't care about the discipline or because they're throwing out the discipline. It's because they do care about the discipline, that they're disagreeing. That's a fair criticism of a few cases. But what I want you to see tonight is that the schism has been planned by the far right for a very, very long time. I have seen documents as old as 2004 from Good News magazine, an organization that was active before the WCA, that outlined their strategy, that they were not going to agree to any kind of contextualization, and their strategy was either to get the people on the far left to leave or they're going to leave. And that has been the strategy all along. I believe in Matthew, let me tell you a story. I believe in Matthew chapter 18. When you have a disagreement with your brother and sister, are you supposed to, first thing you do is supposed to post it on the internet? Is that what it says? No. Go talk to everybody else in town. That's what it says, right? No, it says the first thing you do is you go talk to that person. All right, and you might think, well, Pastor Steve, you wrote a public letter. Okay. For a year and a half before I wrote a letter that went public and went viral, I had been having private conversations with the leader of the North Alabama Wesleyan Covenant Association, the WCA, because I was watching what he was putting out. And he was putting out this strategy that they wanted to overturn the one church plan, which is fine, and they wanted to instead pass a traditional plan, which is fine, but then they were probably going to leave anyway. Hello, wait a minute. That last part caught my attention. And I expressed to him several times that just wasn't, that's schism. If you're planning to leave, why are you even concerned about what's going to pass? Or let me put it to you this way. So you want to overturn what the bishops are trying to figure out to move forward and pass a plan to make it, to kind of crack down on the rules so you can blame people for not following the rules and then leave? I can't be a part of that strategy. That's schismatic. All right, and I'll say it to their face today. I believe that, and it's, now, I'm not saying anybody's been perfect, because we haven't been perfect. Once again, this is culture wars that have spilled over into our church. It's not something wrong with the United Methodist Church. Have you checked into other denominations right now and see what they're going through? They're going through culture wars too. The Southern Baptist Church has lost 1 million members in the last 10 years over fights about some other culture war issues. We got a problem in America. We got a problem in America, and we need revival. And I believe it's that staying together and moving forward and bringing people back to Christ is the answer, not becoming part of the culture and dividing yet again. There are already 40,000 denominations in the world. So I make this decision based on my faith in Christ and my home in God's church. I believe in working for unity. I don't think anybody's perfect, and I don't have to agree with you to be your brother or your sister. But I believe what John 17 says. Jesus prayed for us, and Jesus prayed for unity. And you know how he said that unity was going to come? He didn't say, I hope that y'all get together and have a committee meeting and you vote and you decide what's right about all the politics of the world. That's not what he said. He said, I hope that y'all have love and abide in each other and abide in me just as I abide in my Father. Okay? So our unity is in Christ. And that's the only hope for the world. Christ is the answer. If I have a disagreement with somebody in my family, I don't leave my family. I work it out with my family. So I believe 85% of the United Methodist Church in America plans to stay in the UMC and knows this in our bones. We'll figure it out. We'll work it out together. So that's myth number 5. I'm just going to briefly tell you myth number 6, which is what a used car salesman would say. You better get out now. You better act now. Okay. That's actually a myth. In the links I gave you, I don't know what your timeline is, but in the links I gave you, there is a letter from the North Alabama, the NAC3 team. There's actually 5 letters, and the 4th one, I think, talks about how we've always allowed churches to disaffiliate. There's always been methods. This paragraph isn't active until the end of 2023, but there's always been methods to disaffiliate. Your church could disaffiliate in 20 years if for some reason it's not right anymore. That's happened, and you make an arrangement with the district and with the annual conference. There's also WestPath, the pension program that covers pensions for pastors. They have legislation coming before the 2024 General Conference that if it passes, you don't know what's going to pass, but if it passes, it would allow a disaffiliating church to choose to continue to pay into pensions and take that pension liability forward and continue to use WestPath to pay pensions for their future pastors, and they wouldn't have to pay the pension liability. The reason you have to pay it is because you're getting out of the pension liability if you leave the denomination. I'm sure they've given you a price tag. I don't know what it is for your church, but there's a cost that it would cost your church to disaffiliate, and you're paying for the liability from your past pastors' pensions, as you should, because you paid those past pastors to serve here. So all that's to say, those are some myths, and I just want to openly tell you, don't believe everything you read and don't believe everything you hear. Use discernment, conversation, and good resources. Now, finally, I want to just paint a picture, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A or whatever Josh wants to do afterwards. And I just appreciate y'all listening and listening to my point of view. Finally, I want to paint a picture of what it would be like for you to choose to be a traditional church in the United Methodist Church and stay in the United Methodist Church. And I'm going to start with my local church. Jacksonville Church is a really interesting place. I don't know how long have you been here, Josh? So I've been at a year longer. I've been in Jacksonville the first 2 years. So I came in the middle of 2020. What was going on in the middle of 2020? I met a bunch of people like this. That's what they look like. Okay, we shut down the church 2 weeks after I got here. Boy, some people bring the house down. I just shut them down. You know, it was a weird time to move. But even with all that going on, the first 5 conversations I had with church people, in the first 5 minutes, they talked about, one of the things I love about our church is it's diverse. And it is true, we do have a few black people that go to our church that are members of the church. But they meant diverse in thought. And they said they would use different phrases. They would say, I like it because we're a purple church. Or we're a 50-50 church, somebody said. Or we're a Democrat-Republican church. Or we're a and they would tell this anecdote from their history about how the chair of the Republican Party in Calhoun County and the chair of the Democratic Party in Calhoun County used to be in the same Sunday school class, and they would alternate teaching. Isn't that great, they would say. And it is. It is great. That was very important to them. So I didn't know how they were, we're going to do this stuff. We had a couple of meetings last summer, a year and a half ago, just informational meetings, and got the word out. They didn't want to do anything. When General Conference was delayed again, and the GMC announced it was founding, and the WCA started promoting having discernment processes, my church has not chosen to enter a discernment process. And every time we bring it up, the folks say, we don't really need to do that. My most conservative members, who I have coffee with every once in a while, because I love them, my most conservative members came to me and said, we saw that the GMC founded. we think that's preemptive and premature. We don't really want to be a part of that. Unless something changes, we don't want to leave. So that's my church, choosing to be a traditional church and stay in the United Methodist Church. And I don't know what will happen in 5 years. Maybe they'll discern something then. I don't know. But right now, that's where they are. And it happened to be, we were working on our wedding policies. You know, you just, every once in a while, you have wedding policies here, right? You have to dust them off because they're, people forget what the rules are. And we were working on our wedding policies. So I had a 10-minute conversation at a trustee meeting because we were just walking through figuring out, can you put tape on the pews, those kinds of things that are in the wedding policy. And I said, I just noticed that it doesn't actually say in our wedding policies that we only do weddings, traditional weddings between one man and one woman. I know that's in the discipline, and we're guided by the discipline, but would y'all like to put that in the wedding policy? Just in case that's ever left up to local churches. They looked at me and said, yeah, it's probably a good idea. That way, if we ever make a decision not to do that, it's an intentional decision. That was a 10-minute discussion. And it's in our wedding policies. We're planning to stay a traditional church that loves the Lord, that everybody's welcome. You got to understand about my church. A bunch of my people are retired from Fort McClellan or the Army Depot, and a bunch of my people teach, they're professors at JSU, at the university. You can imagine the diverse politics in my church, and they love it that way. So that's why they're staying in the United Methodist Church, and they're not even entering a discernment process. You don't have to vote or enter a discernment process. All that's optional. There's no plan that's ever said churches can't remain as traditional as they want to be, or that annual conferences can't make decisions about how traditional their churches are. What our bishop has been sharing is a concept of streams. That within an annual conference, our annual conference, you could have streams. You could have more of like a traditional, churches can self-identify if they want to. Some churches don't want to. They've already told her. But you could self-identify. You could be a more traditional church. You could be like a centrist church. There are going to be a few churches, probably not in Roanoke, Alabama, but a few churches that are going to be more progressive churches. Downtown Birmingham, there's a handful, They'll self-identify. And all following under the discipline, they would self-identify, and that would give them, that stream, a chance to coordinate with each other, connect with each other, and they would respect that when appointments are made. Okay, so that's a little bit about what the Methodist Church will look like, and to stay a traditional church in the United Methodist Church. So I just want to close by sharing my heart. I love the church because it's my home. I love the United Methodist Church because it's my home. How many of you have been to Sumatanga? All right. I love Sumatanga. The United Methodist Church gave us Sumatanga. My mother helped move rocks the first year they opened and create a place to build Sumatanga. I love UMCOR, the United Methodist Committee on Relief. I'm sure you've raised money for UMCOR, for storm reliefs. And different things going on. It's the greatest relief organization in the world. There's no overhead. 100% of what you give goes to actual relief efforts because our giving, our tithing, pays for UMCOR's overhead. I love United Methodist Children's Homes, now called Explore, or what is it? Yeah, Alabama Kids, yeah. I love Volunteers in Mission training for organization. I love Wesley Foundations. That's a big deal in Jacksonville, Alabama, because the Wesley Foundation is close by. There's ministers we do. And there are things that we can do together that you can't do alone. I'll just give you one example. This past year at annual conference, we raised an offering of $75,000 for Ukrainian refugees. Okay? Now, I don't know how many, I'm sure you followed this unjust war, Russia invading the Ukraine. You've been following the news, all right? I've seen lots of thoughts and prayers expressed on the internet. But the reason we could raise money and do something about Ukrainian refugees is because we've had two families from our conference who are missionaries, the Clems and the Fridays, that both were missionaries in the Baltic states, and they started United Methodist churches there. And those churches are taking in the refugees from Ukraine, and we're sending money to people we know. You can't do that kind of stuff on your own without being a part of something bigger than you are. And I love that about the Methodist Church. How many of you read The Upper Room? Or have you seen it? Okay. That little book has changed the world. How many of you have ever been to Emmaus? All right. Emmaus is brought to you by the United Methodist Church. I love the Academy for Spiritual Formation. I love all these things. And of all the things the UMC has given you, they also gave you Josh Hickman. All right. You might want to give him back in a few years. But, you know, I love United Methodist spirituality. We're a faith of head, heart, and hands together. We don't tell people, don't think now, don't think, just believe. I love the grace, the emphasis on the grace of God, the pervasive grace of God. We take the Bible seriously, but we don't read it like fundamentalists. We interpret it through tradition, reason, experience. We believe that science and faith are not incompatible. I love United Methodist spirituality. And most of all, I love that we draw people to Jesus and the grace of God rather than trying to force people to become Christians out of a fear of hell and damnation. I love the fact that it's about Jesus Christ and that God's never finished with us yet, and that holiness is ultimately about growing in our love for God and love for our neighbor. And I want to suggest your church, I'm just making my pitch, I'm unashamed, that you could stay traditional and stay in the UMC. There's too much to be lost by leaving. How can you truly be who you are by choosing to be something else? And finally, I'm convicted about staying in the UMC because I have a heart for young people and young adults. Churches, it's a proven fact. Here's what I'm convicted about. Young people in America have been leaving the church in droves because of their perception of intolerance. That's a statistically proven fact. And Methodism needs to get to that place like we were, again, in early America, open to the masses, the regular frontier folks, not the people who act right and look right and the high society people. I'm inviting you to stay traditional, to stay in, and to stay focused on making disciples. Nobody, no plan is going to tell your church you can't be as traditional as you want to be. So thank you for letting me speak tonight. I appreciate the time. Thank you. So what do you do next? I mean, what's
do some Q&A.
Okay.
Last time I tried to run the mic around, and you know, I don't know what it is. I guess people in the church are allergic to microphones.
That's
I didn't
right.
know that, but some of you are. So I'm not going to run the microphone around a lot because even when I gave it to you, you kind of do this thing and you really can't hear.
Right.
So what I'm going to do is you can ask Steve a question. I'm going to get him to kind of repeat back
Okay.
the question just so it'll be picked up for the video purposes. And we'll go from there.
It'll help if you keep the questions brief so I can repeat it.
And
But yeah.
if you need to stand up and move around, you know, do so. Because I was in three meetings with the bishop yesterday, and towards the end, I got up, stood up, and walked around because I had been sitting, you know, the whole day. So if you need to get
All
up,
right.
nobody's going to get offended. But questions, please.
Yes. Yes. In the back. Well, so does my wife, so I understand that. Mm-hmm. Did he break?
The discipline and bearing.
Did the bishop break the discipline? Yes. Yes.
She's talking about the one that came to
The one that came to Birmingham to Alabama, yes. Mm-hmm. Well, here's the problem. He's retired. So what do you do? He was held accountable by our bishop. She very publicly asked him not to do that. That was what? How many years ago was that? Gosh, 10? 10 years ago. Yeah. And I don't think he's even alive anymore. But yes. So were they successful in stopping him? Well, I guess so, because I don't think he did it after that. But it was accountability through more, our bishop. A precedent. Well, no, that was not who set the precedent. He was continuing. There were other people that have defied the discipline from prior to that, and they have been tried, and there's been just resolutions. Yeah, probably over, 20 years? Something like that.
I can think of myself of two other United Methodist clergy that married openly gay people. One was a child of theirs, and they were both punished and had their orders taken away from them.
Yeah, there were consequences.
There were consequences, and they were held accountable. But that did happen.
No, there has not been a change in the discipline. I do not anticipate, none of us anticipate one in 2024, but we don't know the long-term future. Mm-hmm. 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 I'm sorry to hear that. Your son-in-law? Mm-hmm. Well, you will never have to. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I get that. Mm-hmm. Possibility, you really think they're going to want to come to Roanoke, Alabama? Yeah, right. Well, if you are ever appointed a pastor that's not the right one for you, you can have them move. We have methods for that. If something comes out, for example, I can't tell you what's going to happen in 100 years, but I know in the near future, right, I don't know about that. But in the near future, our conference has said very openly that they are not going to force. The last FAQ that I told you on the top of the list, if you'll go read that, there's a question about this in there. And it very openly says our bishop does not plan to appoint someone to your church that's not the right person for your church. That's one of the reasons they're asking churches to be able to self-identify. You have the resource list I gave you. The very top resource is an FAQ from the conference that has come out in the last 3 weeks, and they address that. Yeah.
If you go, you can type it in. Just type this into your search bar. But yeah, I mean, we could send this out. So
yeah. You could also go on the Stay UMC website and find those links. For most churches, that's the bottom line. I'm going to be blunt. For most traditional churches. Yep. Right. I don't see that happening in Roanoke, Alabama, but what's your... She asked, how long do we know our bishop's going to be bishop? She's actually what I would call a centrist. She doesn't take a side. So I wouldn't call her conservative. She's just fair to everybody. Wouldn't you agree with that? Yeah. Our bishop, we know, is going to be here till December. It is possible that she'll be moved because she has served 10 of her 8 years already. because of the pandemic. They've extended it a little bit. Now, because of the separations going on, we're not 100% sure, but this November the 10th?
1 month from tomorrow.
1 month from tomorrow.
And the reason I know that is because I've spent all day with her yesterday, and she said this multiple times. She said 1 month from Thursday, which is tomorrow, they will know. It will be
We'll know whether she's staying
whether or
or
not
not.
she will stay till the end of 2024, and at the end of 24 she will have to move, or if she will be leaving in January.
He knows the better answer. Now, I also remind people, because there's also that myth that what if we get a scary liberal bishop? Okay, you've heard this one. I could add that myth number
That
8.
needs to go on the list.
Yeah, add that to the list. People need to realize bishops are elected from the Southeast. So you're not going to get a bishop from Minnesota or California. Theoretically, it's possible to elect somebody from out in California, but it's never happened. Okay, so our bishop's going to come from the Bible Belt somewhere. And so they're going to be Southern, and I think reasonable. They would have to be. They might promote staying in the United Methodist Church, and I hope so. And part of the scary bishop myth is you'll hear stories like the Mount Bethel situation over with Bishop Sue over in Georgia, and how, she mistreated that church. Well, that's a matter of opinion. That church it was the largest church in Georgia, and they wanted to, not only did they want to leave the denomination, but they didn't want to follow what the discipline says you have to do in order to leave the denomination. They just refused to take an appointment, kick the appointed pastor out. The pastor quit, and they hired him back as a layperson, and they ordained him. You can't do that. That's not by following the discipline. So she's hard-nosed. She's not progressive. She's hard-nosed. She used to be a lawyer, and you can tell.
The other thing, and I know this from personal experience, I've got friends that worked in the Mount Bethel Church. The other thing they don't ever tell you is that for at least about 10 years, they've been putting every one of their apportionment dollars in escrow as a protest against the United Methodist Church.
Right, so.
You don't ever hear that brought up.
Right.
And the bishop was mean to Mount Bethel stories.
Right.
There's two sides to every story. And I hear a lot from one side, and I don't hear the counter argument made a lot. So I'm sorry, I'm engaging. I probably shouldn't.
Our bishop's going to be reasonable, whoever it is. And from the
Other
South.
questions?
I'm a Southern guy. I've never lived north of Athens, Alabama. So when I say they're going to be Southern, just, you know what I mean. Okay. Other questions? Those are great questions. That's actually the two things I get most questions about is the next bishop and am I going to have a gay pastor? Yes.
Could you go over exactly how, if, like in the Council of Bishops, we have the bishop from Oregon. How in the world did that happen? And do the bishops themselves have a vote and say this person should not be here because this person is against the discipline?
The bishop from Oregon?
Avoleto, it's not Oregon, it's...
You're talking about Mountain Sky Conference. Okay, so let me understand your question now that I know what we're talking about.
Let's see if you can clarify. Do we have a gay bishop in the Council of Bishops?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And there's been lots of protests and work against that, but yes.
Yes. And why in the world, if it's against our discipline, why did that happen? And I know there's a lawyering program, but do the Council of Bishops have a vote and to
Okay, how does that work?
Schmiegel's stuff?
Right. Okay. How does the legal schmiegel stuff work around Bishop Oliveto? The main thing I can tell you is, first of all, bishops don't have a vote at General Conference. They do not have a vote at General Conference. The only people that have votes, the bishops convene and lead the meetings, but they don't have a vote. at General Conference. The General Conference rules are set by the delegates from each annual conference. So they don't have a vote, to answer your specific question. The complexity of that is fundamentally because in 1939, when the Methodist Episcopal Church South and the Methodist Episcopal Church and the Methodist Protestant Church joined together to become the Methodist Church, they also integrated. And the jurisdictional autonomy with the 5 jurisdictions over the bishop was created to basically appease the Southerners, because they didn't want to get a bishop from California and come desegregate the church. Okay, I'm just telling you the gut honest truth. That's why in 1939 they set up 5 jurisdictions, and each jurisdiction is responsible for its own bishops. Well, that's what's at play right now. The Judicial Council has ruled that an openly, you got to say openly, an openly lesbian person should not be ordained bishop, but there's also not constitutionally, they have to deal with that in the Western jurisdiction. And they have brought her up on charges and dismissed them in the Western jurisdiction. So to answer your question, why? It's a different part of the world than I live in.
But they brought her up, but what's come up?
They've dismissed the charges.
They brought conservatives in that area brought her up on charges, but then others in that jurisdiction, the same group of people are made up of others, and they dismissed the charges.
There was a trial. So now, for me, this comes back to are you a traditional compatibilist or not? That's not in Jacksonville, Alabama. It doesn't bother me a whole lot. They got to work that out. You know, I'm more worried about what happens in Alabama, what we need to work out. But that's me. That's a minor blip on the big scheme of things to me.
So in other words, all the bishops throughout the world, the ones in Africa and all that, are not abiding by
The discipline?
the discipline.
No, I wouldn't say that.
They are not. So why have the discipline?
No, they are abiding by the discipline.
But
Yeah.
if we have a gay bishop that's not abiding by the discipline.
That's not.
That's one bishop, not all the bishops.
Yeah.
The Western jurisdiction itself has to hold her accountable. They have chosen not to. It's not a bishop's thing. It's the other. It's more complicated than that, because it's not. Alabama can't. Our jurisdiction here in the Southeast can't hold a bishop in the Western jurisdiction accountable for something she does.
Unless we change the Constitution.
Because then vice versa could come into play. If we in the Southeast can tell the Western jurisdiction how they should operate,
They could tell us.
then the Western jurisdiction gets to come over here and tell us how we should operate.
And you don't want that.
Does anybody want that?
No, you don't want that.
No.
Yeah. Now, one of the possible outcomes is if we could change the Constitution along the way over the next 10 years. I don't know if we will, but we could. They're about, in the United States, I was going to say 45, but that's worldwide, right? You mean living active or retired? Okay, if you mean active bishops, not retired, and you mean in the United States, there's something like 30 or 35. I don't know the exact number, I'm sorry. Unless there's some kind of extraordinary circumstances. They stay within their jurisdiction. Bishop Wallace Paget came from Kentucky. Our previous bishop, Bishop Fannin, came from Florida. Do what? Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped over Willimon. He came from North Carolina.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, was a Freudian slip.
Yeah, that was a Freudian slip, sorry. I love Bishop Willimon, but he wasn't a very good bishop. He's a great writer. He's a fantastic writer. So, yeah. So we'll get a bishop from Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Virginia. We don't know. Yes? Right.
Speak too loud. Being new in the Methodist Church, I don't understand a lot about bishops and stuff.
Uh-huh.
But my question is, the myth one, you said the beliefs would not drastically change.
Mm-hmm.
What changes just simply could?
Well, I was saying that the myth is that they would drastically change. None of our core doctrinal beliefs are going to change.
Like our hymnals or anything? I've heard that. Or is anything going to change?
Well, that's a good question. Is anything going to change? The answer would have to be yes. Something always changes in the discipline, you know. Right. No. Oh, in the local church? No. Yeah. The book of discipline does not require that your local church has a special personality or, you know, there are local churches that don't even use the hymnals. Now, I love the hymnal. But you can go out in the country.
Just things I've heard that I think would be just little things that are different.
Right.
Playing on that word drastically, I thought.
Yeah, local church worship traditions are rooted in our common heritage, but there's diversity, depends on the local church. You know, your church would decide stuff like whether you have pew Bibles. That's a local church.
Like the doors are open to everyone. Our church would decide what leadership part anybody can play in.
Absolutely.
Teach Sunday school or teach.
Absolutely. That's a local church decision now. And that's actually true. Yeah, and that's actually in the discipline. Your church has a lay leadership committee that nominates people for election into lay leadership positions. And y'all have a method. I don't know what your local church, y'all have a method for choosing Sunday school teachers. Every church is responsible for defining their own leadership, yes. And if rules are ever allowing churches to do different things, they're never going to tell you to do anything, if that makes sense. Yeah. There are churches with lay people in them who are gay, who are leadership in the local church. Sure. All over the place. Depends on the local church.
I mean, like, I'm concerned with small children, Sunday school class, and the way the schools are right now, scary to me. I'm sorry.
Well, and your local church would make those decisions. Absolutely.
So if we got another, well, I don't know Josh feels about that, but if we got another preacher, they can change that, they can do whatever they want.
No, in a Methodist church, preacher can't do whatever the preacher wants to do. Yeah. Y'all have a church council or an administrative board, or what do you call it? Church council? This church has an administrative board that makes central decisions. And in the Methodist discipline, and this is part of our DNA, pastors have a very important role, but they don't run everything. That's real important to know.
One of the things he just mentioned is when we nominate leaders, I'm the chair of that committee, but then it's made up of smarter people and wiser people than I, like Miss Bechtel, who vetoes everything I want to do. No, I'm just kidding.
They can.
She literally has the better ideas.
Right.
Some of the most ingenious decisions we made about leadership came from Miss Bechtel this year. So that's how that works, and it should work. And it,
It should work that way. And pastors don't make financial decisions for the local church. That's a good example. In other denominations, pastors have their hands on the money. I don't like that, personally. Somebody said to me once, well, you know how much I give. I said, no, I don't. You don't look at the records? I said, no, I don't. So, the only way I know what you give is if you walk in and hand me a check. That's the only way I know what you give. So, okay. These are great questions, practical questions. Yeah.
The discernment team is aware of that number, and that number, the reason, I mean, we can share that number. I'm not going to share it openly here because I don't have it like precisely in front of me. But what you also need to be aware of is that that number changes, and right now in the month of October, that number is set to change this month. And because of what's going on in the economy, that number is getting smaller every quarter. Now it could go up
because
the
stocks
next
and
quarter.
bonds are going.
Yeah, because stocks and bonds are going up. So that number is going down currently. And so that number, we will get a new number after the 15th of this month, or we should receive an updated number. And then in January, we should also get a new number. So every quarter,
Now,
that number is adjusted.
Before you have a church-wide vote, that number will be shared with you, obviously. Yeah. Do y'all have a vote scheduled? I don't know what you're
Yes.
Okay, all right.
I've just received it, an email about that today.
Okay,
But there is discussion about when that date
gotcha, all right.
is going to be.
So it's not ironed out yet.
Once
but-
again, I'm not going to announce that date because we were told that the meeting, that schedule, that voting meeting would be scheduled at another time, and that's different than the schedule I just received today in the email. So anyway.
You don't want to give out the wrong date.
I'm not going to tell you now because it likely will change. And so I'm not trying to withhold information, I promise. I just don't want to tell you something and then everybody go tell, everybody, and then it'll be different next week. And so.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, sure. Yeah. The deadline and the date is related to getting out with this particular plan because what was in that passed at General Conference 2019, which is a plan by which you pay 2 years. The short answer is you pay 2 years of apportionments and you pay off your pension liability, which is going to be a different number for each local church depending on the size and the strength and the history of that local church based on your past pastors' pensions that we're liable for. So that plan expires at the end of 2023. That's why you've got to, there's at least two dates where the annual conference is going to vote on disaffiliating churches, December 10th and then May 11th. And there may be another one next December. Depending on whether it's needed. Yeah. So that's where the deadline comes from. But there have been churches historically that have disaffiliated. You just have to work it out with the district superintendent at that time for whatever the reason is. But not with that plan, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I understand. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Is there a good chance you would be able to? Is that your question? I think there's a good chance, yes. I think I understand your question. Your question is will there be another alternative, an option to wait and then disaffiliate at a later time? A reasonable alternative to do that? Yeah. I think there will. We can't say what's going to pass, But yeah, I feel sure that some sort of avenue for disaffiliating will be presented and passed, because we're not in prison here. I mean, there's no sense. Nobody's trying to hold churches hostage. So. Right.
Can I say something about that? Once again, I just had the privilege of being with the bishop, and one of the things she made very clear to the group that she spoke to yesterday, and if I was a better pastor, I would have let you know about that and invited you and maybe even drawn the bus to let you hear her. I'm sorry I failed you in that regard. But one of the things that she made very clear in every meeting I was in is that the leadership team, there's a leadership team that's looking at this time for us called the NAC 3 team. Mm-hmm. And this team is made up of progressives and centrists and, progressive, centrist, and conservatives. They're African American, they're Caucasian, they're multi-generational. This team has made a commitment to our annual conference to ensure that to work with churches that want to disaffiliate beyond the 2024 conference. So beyond the deadline for this paragraph and beyond the 2024 conference, to work with churches that plan or decide they need to disaffiliate in a non-punitive, non-punishing way. Now she said, now granted, that's not very precise, but it has to not be precise because we don't know exactly what the context will be.
Right.
But she said, your leadership, not me, your leadership in North Alabama has said we're going to work with churches that feel called to disaffiliate in ways that are fair and just and are non-punitive. I think the idea is that if we don't leave right now, then whatever options come down the road in the future are going to be punitive. They're going to try and control us and make sure that we cannot leave.
And that's a myth. Yeah.
And that's a myth, and it's a bad misrepresentation of most Methodists I know. And I'll be honest with you, I take that to bank because I know how hard-headed and stubborn and really just kind of bullyish some of the North Alabama leadership in this Methodism can be. So if a liberal bishop came in and said, we're going to change that,
they would say, no, we're not.
How many people in North Alabama do you know allow some outsider to come in and say, we're going to change everything about this and get away with it? I mean, that is written down. It is written down.
The letters that the NAC3 team put out that I put in the resource list, there's 5 letters. It's in one of those, I think the 4th one. It's assurance that we've always allowed churches to disaffiliate if for some reason they need to disaffiliate. Oh, well, they're not going to do that. They're just not going to do that. But they're not going to do that.
They're not going to do that because they maybe could. That might grant that might guarantee you have to pay more.
Yeah.
Than you might in a different situation.
There's too much uncertainty. Yeah.
Once again, I'm talking too much. But one of the things I've also heard our bishop say in the last 2 weeks that's very helpful is that when it comes to regards to the question of if she leaves in December, she said she gets asked about this. People come up to her and say, Bishop, we know you're moving in January. And she goes, well, that's quite interesting because nobody's told me that.
Right.
And so I asked her, I said, people in my church have told me you're moving, Bishop, and they're concerned that if you move, this gracious exit strategy that we're being given now is going to leave with you. And she said, Josh, let me tell you what I'd tell them if they asked me that. This entire plan that's laid out before us is not my plan. This entire policy, the amounts that you're being asked to pay, all of that is not set up by me. It's decided on and it was created, designed, and executed by your board of trustees. I, your bishop, am one person and one vote on that board of trustees. And so I need you to tell them, she said, this was not my plan. It is the board of trustees for North Alabama Conference's plan.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can change the bishop out all you want to, but the plan was created and overseen and is led by the board of trustees. And those people aren't moving in January no matter what. So
But you're right, they're not going to. But it would be nice. I guess there's too much financial uncertainty about the future. That's predicting markets 5 years from now, you know. Mm-hmm. Well, if the annual conference voted to have them do that, then they would at annual conference. So your delegate could propose that. We're a representative institution, so.
And I've seen one person stop the entire finance committee of the North Alabama Conference from proceeding with its budget for the year. One person. And so when he says that one person can change how things are done in North Alabama, I've seen it happen in drastic ways that you would not think possible.
Because the annual conference can vote. And if by vote, they could require something like that. Yeah. You can make that happen. Who's your delegate?
Ms. Freddie Hill.
Okay. Mm-hmm. That's a well put. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, a lot of people are thinking of it as a financial decision.
Not only that,
Mm.
we need to think of our young people and the children that will be involved when we're,
Right.
10 years down the road.
Right.
It's not a decision you make as much with your head, but you gotta put your heart into it.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Would you comment on the United Methodist missions and how churches disaffiliating would affect that?
The question is to comment on United Methodist missions and how churches disaffiliating will do. Well, I think I understand your question. We'll address that. Well, I think churches who disaffiliate will need to be real careful to make sure they have an adequate missions program, because they wouldn't be giving in to the global missions of the United Methodist Church. So your church would need to decide, how are we going to do missions beyond our local community? Because every church needs to do that as a part of what you do.
But if we have churches pulling away and not contributing,
Mm-hmm.
would it in turn affect the effectiveness of the missions that we have going on?
Well, sure, because you're going to have budget cuts, right? And again, if say 15% of the churches, you'd have to do some serious budget cuts. But budget cuts are okay. I bet your churches had to do budget cuts before. Like in 2008, I bet you did some serious ones. You make do. You figure it out. But yeah, there's repercussions. These
Any
are
other
great
questions?
These are great questions. And fairly painless, thank you. No fights, yeah. No eggs thrown.
I told them at the administrative council, the reason we didn't live stream this was just in case the fight broke out.
Oh, okay. All right. I got you.
You
Well, y'all
can't
are,
get
y'all are on your best behavior.
you
I
can't get
appreciate
up on Sunday morning and say stuff like that from the pulpit, but you can say it in an administrative council
That's
meeting,
right.
or apparently you can. I don't know. I mean,
Uh-huh. Oh, gosh.
any other questions? I know y'all are like, some of you are like, if he asks if there are any other questions one more time, I'm gonna reduce my tithe. I tell you what, if you'll all increase your giving by 1%, I'll close this meeting right now. Let's. I want to thank Steve again.
You're
You've done a
welcome.
great job. I think many of you know where I am on this and where my heart is, and if it appears that I'm biased because I participated more in this one than in the other one, it is because it's true. And so anyway, I've tried. I don't think you understand how hard I've tried to just stay out of this because I don't want to put my finger on the scale. And so I feel like I've kind of betrayed that a little bit tonight, and so I'm sorry. But this is where I come from, and this is where my head and heart is. So anyway, whether that's a needed apology or not, I want to give it to you, offer it to you. And let's pray. God, we give you thanks for this evening and for my friend, Reverend Steve West, and we ask you to continue to bless him, his ministry, and the ministry of Jacksonville First United Methodist Church. God, we thank him for coming and spending time with us and sharing information with us and then answering our questions. God, we ask that you would continue to be our guide in this, that you would lead and guide this process and our church, and that ultimately we would do what you would have us do, not what we would want us to do, and that includes all of us. And so help. I admit that will only be possible if you make it so. So God, we implore you to lead and guide us, and keep us together, and as a body of faith, seeking your wisdom. We pray in Christ's holy name. Amen.